How are you doing?
Uh, you know, about the same as probably everyone else is, slowly going insane, trying to keep it trying to keep it together, staying
Yeah,
inside, it's all the things.
good, good. And what I like to, sorry, my ice machine just
It's all
dropped.
good.
What I like to ask everyone is there anything from this experience that you're learning about yourself or about life in general?
That's a good question. I think I think like a lot of people, the remote work thing is really interesting. Cause like I did it for a year when I was doing my coaching stuff, but it was just me. Like there's no one to talk to. Right? It's just like me and the clients. But I think watching an entire company basically go from like not doing that at all to doing that completely, especially something so physical like apparel design, it's been really, really interesting to watch happen and watch people like adapt and change to the point where it's like everything's running exactly like it's supposed to. And like it's a little inconvenient now and then, but we've mostly figured it out. I think that's been really interesting to watch.
How has the change been like going from you were at BuzzFeed right before you went into the coaching thing? So going from like a tech publication to an apparel company, like
Been Yeah, it's been interesting. I think they have more in common with each other than other things I've done, where like other places I've worked at, like the technology was the product that you sold kind of, right? So like Etsy is a platform, but yeah, you're like selling the entire product. You're selling to people who want to sell on it and you're selling to people who want to buy on it. Amazon obviously is basically fully a technology based company. Like the majority of their profits come from technology products that they make. But BuzzFeed and Primary are similar in that the thing that both of them are selling is not the technology at all. Like it's enabled by that, but it is not like the core thing. Like if Primary never had a technology team, they could run the whole thing on Shopify and never worry about it, right? Or like BuzzFeed, like you wouldn't do this, but you could run it on WordPress. Like if a whole technology team disappeared, like there's a way, like the real product still remains, which is like the writing and the articles and like the videos and stuff like that. And so like I actually think I prefer this way of working, like where it's like technology is supporting as a supporting player in a business rather than it being the business. I think I'm enjoying that more.
cool. I'm going to borrow one of the prompts from your tweet last night because I
Oh,
thought
sure.
it was a good one. And also, everyone, we're using the Q&A feature, so if you have any questions, feel free to drop a question in there. So you had one that was like, do you want to know what it's like for a designer to manage a bunch of other disciplines? So I
Mm.
would love to hear about that.
Yeah, it's been kind of crazy. So like at BuzzFeed, I did a little bit of this. I managed our IT team for about 2 years, I think, while I was there, in addition to the design team. And then I wound up also managing briefly for about 6 months the like an operations team on the business side, like the branded business side of things. And so then when I left, what I was looking for was a role to manage more things. I think I realized the the power in being able to touch a bunch of things at the same time and try to like coordinate them. Like there's something really powerful about that.
Yeah.
Um, if you can do it well. And so when I talked to Primary, they were like, we have no HR. We have all these things that need help, including the technology team. And so I started out managing design and product and HR. I'm still our only HR person. And it's fine. It's only 50 people. It's not that bad. But I started out doing that stuff. And then a few months in, our CTO moved on from the company. And so then now I manage all the engineers. Um, and then as of recently, I'm also managing like the last couple of days, it's been announced that I'm managing our creative team too, which actually that's not that different, right? That's like design stuff. I know what to do with that.
Mhm.
But that's been interesting. I've always had this theory that when I was just a design manager, I had a theory that it wasn't that much different than basically managing anything else um, at like a foundational level. And it's turned out to be mostly true. I think like I keep checking in with engineers to find out how it's going. And they're like, I mean, I can't think of anything, so it's going really well. Like it's going better than expected, which is nice to hear. I think like it turns out most people just need someone to like who knows what they're doing, can talk about it a little bit, like helps build a team to support them, like builds the structures in place to support them, and like that seems to be enough, I think, for the most part. I try to make sure that I don't need to be the most technical person in any conversation ever, obviously, or like the most design forward person in a conversation, and so it tends to work out that way.
Yeah, I think it would be good to have somebody who's design forward in a lot of those capacities.
I think it helps. Like, I think HR was the thing I really thought about a lot, because the user experience of HR is trash.
Yeah.
Like at most companies, right? It's like, we don't trust them, we don't like them. They are constantly getting in our way. Like for employees, like you don't really want to talk to them. If you're talking to them, something bad's happening, right? And they're probably not your friend. And I just think there's like and also HR teams are in a tough spot because they're small and they're centralized and they don't have user experience like backgrounds, so they don't know a lot of the tools we have to like talk to your users, and get feedback and act on that. And so yeah, I've always thought that like HR was right for becoming like a user experience discipline.
So at Clarity, you gave a talk called How to BP, and now you're a CXO. And so I was just wondering if you find a big difference between the two roles, or are they really just kind of a title difference for you?
The scope of influence is different. Like certainly, I think because I'm touching so many things, obviously, like that. So it's less about the title. I think it's more about what I'm overseeing.
Yeah.
So it's like there's a world where I have this title and I'm only managing design, and so my scope would not be that different,
Right.
maybe, than BuzzFeed, right? But like because it's touching so many things, like I get pulled into a lot of different conversations and have a lot more influence over various parts of the organization that maybe I wouldn't otherwise, where I'd be coming in sideways maybe with an opinion. Now I don't have to do that because I'm managing it directly, so I can
Gotcha.
have more direct conversations about it.
Cool. Ryan asks, speaking of management, how do you direct design without being overly prescriptive? And what level of creative guidance do you give your team versus giving them freedom to figure it out for themselves?
That's a good question. I think it's something a lot of people struggle with. I'm blessed because I am not the best designer ever. Like on any team I've ever been on, it's never been true unless I'm working alone, because then I'm the only one, so I have to be the best one. And so that really has helped, I think, at Etsy when I started managing designers. Like, I think I would say all of them were or quickly became better designers than I had been, like in my career, because they spent all their time on it, right? And so I find myself a lot of the time doing a couple of things. I think one, my job is enabling them to do that work. And so a lot of my conversations are like, what do you need for me? Like, what can I do to get this out of your way, or to help you make a decision, or to like put you in touch with the right person, or to make sure you don't have to talk to that person. And then the other thing I'm doing at a high level, I think, is this is kind of happened at Etsy and BuzzFeed, I think, where we've developed over time philosophies about how work should happen and what good outcomes look like. And if you can get agreement on that amongst your team, like they will do the work you were hoping they would do and have the conversations you were hoping they would have by themselves. It's always really gratifying to see a team conversation happen and not have to say anything because someone is saying exactly what you would have said anyway, because from a principle perspective, like everyone's acting on that. And so I think that's really that should be the goal, is to get people to a place where, sure, the solution might be different than what you would have thought of, but from a principles perspective and a philosophy perspective, it's exactly what you would hope for. And so then that's fine, right? Because it's really not about getting your idea in the world.
So you're not a hovering art director.
No, I mean, although obviously, I love talking about design stuff. Like I love sitting down with Jess or Yue, who are the designers of Primary, and like jamming on problems together. Like that's a really fun, happy place for me. But also I think I try to make it clear that like it's most of the time I'm not telling us what to do unless we're under like extreme time constraints and like we just need a decision or something like that. But that's so rare. I try to leave it open.
Cool. So this is going to be kind of a silly question, but do you still do the sliding scale of giving a fuck?
You know what's funny? That's like my most popular thing. So popular even that my parents have referenced it to my face. And it was just like, if I had known that that's how it was going to go, I probably would have named it differently. Yeah, someone asked me this a couple of years ago. This is how weird it is. I was at a friend's wedding and we're like standing there watching the first dance, and someone sidles up to me and they're like, "So, do you still use the?" And they asked me the same question you just asked me. And my answer, I think, now is the same as it was then, which is like not in that format anymore. I think like it's turned over time more into an algebraic equation. I think like when I was like an entry-level manager or a designer, like that scale is really useful, I think, because it is very rote and blunt. And most of the conversations I was in didn't require a lot of like inputs at the same time. It was like me and an engineer negotiating, right? So I had to figure out how much I cared. Now, and at BuzzFeed, I found this to be true too. It's like I'm calculating like not only how much do I care, how much does the other person care, or their team care, or my team care, or if we do this now, what does that mean for like 3 months from now? Like if I say, okay, now can I like use that to like care later about something more important over here? Like there's a lot of like more complex math that's going on now, but it's not like anything really conscious. I think I just feel it being more fluid and not as easy as like this like single thing.
Yeah. Maybe real quick for anyone that's not familiar with it, do you want to describe what I'm talking about?
Oh yeah, sure. So I I wrote this blog post a while back about I was working with this engineer on a project, and at the time I was really tuned up about every decision we made. So like it had to be the best design decision, the best UX decision, even if it was super hard to do, whatever. And we just argued constantly. It was awful. It was like so draining. Um, and eventually one day we're in the middle of an argument, and this engineer, his name was Andy, he goes, wait. I'm like a 4 out of 10 on this. What are you? And it completely blew my mind, because then I was like, I guess I'm like a 6. Like I never thought about it before. And he was like, great, we'll do that then, and like walks away. And so from then on, I started using that to like really gauge how I was feeling. And so I'd be like, well, how strongly do I really feel? Is it like a 2 or an 8? And that kind of check in like pointed out a couple things to me. One, I was at a 10 way too often.
Mm-hmm.
And that's insane. You just can't be. You can't live that way.
Right.
And then 2, there is a spectrum. And so like being able to know when to give and take and when to end an argument is really helpful. And so this is like something that people really seem to latch onto, because it's like, I think, an easy answer to a really complicated problem of like communicating.
Yeah, we used it at Salesforce on the design system team.
It helps. I mean, it's like,
That's
it is a
helpful.
very,
Yeah. I was talking to someone the other day who brought up that apparently Netlify has this system that reminded me of it, where it's like, is this like a mountain, or is it like a pebble, or like you had these different scales of rock things.
That's interesting.
Yeah,
I
I need to look more into it because it sounded really cool, and they use it for like prioritizing what they work on, I think, or like even with like issues filed, that kind of thing. So I want to look more into it because it sounded like a cool metaphor.
Yeah, I think there's also, there's like the how much do you care thing, but then there's also complexity maps and stuff like that, right? Where it's like how hard or complicated or risky is this thing, so that we can then like make better decisions about it.
Yeah. So you had another thing in your tweet last night that I thought I'd mention, which was why you still think designers should code. And I would love to dive into that.
I'm going to die on that hill, Gina. I'm just going to die there alone. It's just one of these weird philosophical things. I think that's about engineers too. I get this feedback sometimes when I say that like designers should code, which is like, well, why don't engineers design? And I'm like, they should. What are you talking about? They do, actually, like all the time. And so I think it's one of those things where, particularly on the web, like specifically, if you're designing for the web, I don't think you really know what's happening until you are implementing something on the front end. And I don't mean like you have to write like back-end code or like wire it all up, although I do know designers who can do that stuff, and then they're very scary people. But just being able to like take your static thing, and even in the tools we have now, like where you can easily create mobile artboards and like tablet artboards, it still doesn't tell you exactly what's going to happen. Like I still am surprised by how like designs break down at different screen sizes or at different even window sizes and resolutions. Like so much so that I, in my personal life, I don't design for mobile or anymore because I just like do it in code because it's the only way to be sure. But nothing survives first contact, right? Like, so when you design something, designers get seen, like in my life, I've seen them get really ticked off because like engineering is like, well, we can't do it this way, or we can't, you know, when we break it down like this, it breaks. So what do you want to do? Or engineering makes decisions for you about what it's going to look like. And that just really peeves everyone off. And so I'm like, well, then the answer is to own it and to fix it. And I think also what's really interesting about front end in particular, for whatever reason, like accessibility has become like a design owned thing. I think in general, this is my perception, at least in the world, is that like designers tend to talk about it more than the engineering circles I run in. I don't hear much about accessibility in engineering circles generally. But if you're not writing the front end like of your website where all of that happens, like the HTML really matters, like how it's written really matters, like there are like engineering decisions that if you're not there to watch them will cause your site to become completely inaccessible. Like React is a really bad actor. Like if it's unchecked, it can be a really bad actor and create a ton of weird stuff. If you don't have someone who really cares watching over it. And so accessibility, I think maybe because it starts with the design itself and like the colors and the font sizes and stuff, it becomes a design problem. But that's not, as we know, on the web or in apps, like where it stops. And so just because your colors and your font choices are accessible doesn't mean that your website's accessible. And so like if we really care about that stuff and the user experience, it just goes all the way down into the code. And so I don't know how you can stop before that.
Yeah. At Salesforce, it changed. Like when I started on the team, accessibility was more under engineering, but the problem was it was like a checkpoint right before shipping. And then like they would have to like rework things. And so we moved that to be under the design system umbrella. And then that definitely made everything streamlined a lot better. Like we still checked it at that phase, but we had earlier checks too. And it's important for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think like my experience has been that a lot of engineers, for better or worse, and this is like not to like bag on engineers, but like a lot of them just aren't as interested in the front end. I've noticed this thing, like you have front engineers who really obviously care and that's their specialty, but I know a lot of full stack engineers were like the front end's the last thing they want to talk about. Like, you know what I mean? It's the thing that they hate CSS, HTML scary. And so, but then if you're not, and whatever, people have strengths and weaknesses, they have like things they care about and don't, like it's totally reasonable for that to be a thing. But like but again, what are you sacrificing? And as a designer, how much do you care about like making sure that use case is covered? And I think you should care.
And for people like that, it makes me skeptical. I'm like, are you actually full stack then?
I agree. Look, I feel you. I am like 100% on board with that.
Yeah. So I would admit, I think I'm a stronger web designer because I code, but I am a weak mobile designer because I don't know how to code for mobile. And
interesting.
like, because I would end up having to do a lot more work around specifying things to engineers.
Yeah.
And it's just tedious. And, you know, design systems and design tokens definitely have helped me. But when I was designing Android apps and iPhone apps, like earlier in my career, I wish design tokens were a thing.
Yeah, totally.
That was a lot of redlining, and that was not fun.
God, if I never redline again, I'll be happy. It's like,
yeah,
it's the worst. It is the worst thing.
So I'm curious what your thoughts are on the no code movement then, which is, I don't think it's like going to replace coders at all, but it's an interesting movement that's kind of rising. And are you familiar with what I'm talking about?
I think so, but if you want to hum a few bars.
So it's basically the idea that you can launch companies and apps and products without the requirement to code.
Totally.
Use things like Zapier and like tools like Webflow or even like Google Sheets, you know, and just hook everything up so
Yep.
that you have everything running without coding.
That's the
And
dream, right? Like that
yeah,
sounds amazing. I think it's one of those things where you can do you can do that now. Um, I mean, that is what Shopify or Etsy
right,
or Wix or, you know, Squarespace, that's what they all are, right? And I think
right.
no matter what I think almost no matter what the no code movement can get you, there's always a certain point in a business's life cycle, like if it's really successful, where you want to do more than is possible by like trying to wire up a bunch of third party crap together. You know what I mean? Because like
Yeah,
I think to get off the ground and run a thing, that sounds amazing, right? Like if I
yeah,
could take a Google sheet, and I mean this, you can do all this stuff now mostly. Like take a Google sheet, make it your database, like have something appearing on a site somewhere from it. Like all this stuff's very doable and helps you get something up and running and test your ideas. But I think my experience at least tells me that at some point you're gonna want something that's not that, you know, like at primary, there's a whole thing about like, how do we really own color? That was a question, still a question, but like it's something we really want to own in like the clothing space, like
right,
color be our thing. And so our normal just like filter by color was not going to work. Like we had that and we had like 48 colors, and so that's completely broken, right? And then like we're going to add 20 more colors, so that really breaks it. Like, it's how are you going to have like a drop down of 68 colors to filter by, right? And
yeah,
so at that point we're like, okay, we should design and build a custom way of filtering by color, which we wound up doing. It was super successful. And so like I think there are going to be these moments where it's just not enough, especially if you're successful. So I think it's fine. I think that's great. I think helping people build businesses and start products without having to code is awesome.
yeah. I'm intrigued by it for sure.
Yeah.
So prior to your role that you have now and after BuzzFeed, you were doing coaching, and I would love to hear if there were any insights you gleaned from that experience.
Yeah. So I coached I'll say I coached 100 people in that year. It was close to that. Um, and I think and these are like not just designers. So designers, design managers, engineers, product people, like I had a pretty wide array.
Mhm.
Um, and I think what was interesting and disappointing, maybe at the same time, is that it's all the same shit. Like, it's all the same. Everyone has very similar problems. Like, they're dealing with similar stuff at work, right? Where it's like, I don't know how to get promoted, like, or I don't know how to talk to my manager, you know, or I don't know who my manager is, or, you know, I just got promoted. I don't know what my job is now. Like, it's like all very similar. Um, and no one's figured it out. So it's like, it's comforting in a way, right? Because when you go through something at work like that now, like whenever I see someone going through it or I'm going through something or feeling something, I'm like, this is normal. Like, that's okay. Like, everyone has these feelings. Like, everyone kind of goes through this.
Yeah,
And so that was really helpful to me. I think it is clear that there's not, I think, because I was targeting first time managers mostly, and I had some ICs and some higher level people than that, but it was mostly first time managers. And like, it is clear there is not enough support for those folks. Like, there's just not enough. Like HR will do a 2-day training once a year. You know what I mean? Like, it's just not enough. And then you wind up in situations where those people start managing managers, and now it's like even more different. And you will wind up in situations where like that's how bad teams get built, and that's how that process gets like solidified and cemented. And so that's also something that's extremely clear to me, is like there is just like not enough support and training and help for those folks. We let people have executive coaches that cost $1,000 an hour, right? But like
yeah,
your frontline managers, who are probably more important, really, you know, because they like control everything.
yeah,
Um, like there's just nothing. So that's tough, I think.
yeah. I what I would have loved during like really any of my corporate gigs that I had was like coaching on like how do you even get into management in the first place. But
Totally.
I feel like a lot of people just kind of just get promoted, but there's no like explanation, or I never received any explanation of how do I get there.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I've run into people too who like, are you familiar with the Peter principle?
Mm-mm.
Where it's like, so it's this idea that everyone gets promoted to the level that they are mediocre at. So you were great at your previous level and then you got promoted, but now you're there forever because you can't like, you won't accept a demotion, but you're just okay at this. And so it's like everyone winds up here in their career. Like that's the idea anyway. And there's definitely a lot of that, I think, at higher levels, especially in tech orgs, because they're all so young still and like they have not enough history behind them to really like understand how to fix that. But that's a real thing. Or like someone was an amazing designer and now is director of design as a team of 12 or something like that, and just like hates it and doesn't know what to do about it, but won't go back. Right. And so now you're stuck and with this person who doesn't want to be doing what they're doing. You know, that's why that's how that question comes, right? Like that question from before about like, how do I not micromanage this? Like, don't be the best designer anymore. Like you have to just stop. But like, if you didn't want to do that and got promoted just because you're the senior designer, like that's it. Right. So
Yeah.
it's tough.
I remember there was this person I worked with, also at Salesforce. Most of the time when I talk about my past experience, it's like Salesforce because I was there for a while. But she had been a manager and then a director like for a while, and then she missed designing, and so she actually chose to go back to being an individual contributor. And after about 6 months, she went back to management because she said she had been an IC for so long that she felt super rusty and like
Totally.
this was like struggling, and so she just went back to management, and I thought that was really fascinating.
Yeah, it's good to be able to have that flexibility, I think.
Yeah.
Like once you are in there, yeah. But yeah, getting into management's tough. It's like I was reading some Twitter exchange between a couple people I follow, and they were talking about this, and like one of them said like the problem is not only does no one know how to get into it, but also the positions are really rare because like I used to say this at BuzzFeed too when people would ask me about being a manager. I'd be like, look, like I can promote everybody to senior designer tomorrow, like if I wanted to, right? Like I have to make the case and all that, but like I could do it. There's no limited amount of senior designers that we could have, but we don't need more managers. You know what I mean? Like we need the right amount of them. And so it's like another one of those weird need-based things where it's like you have to be in the right place at the right time with the right team composition or growth to open that up with the right person sponsoring you internally to get you there, right? Or you need to leave your job and specifically to find a management job, which is what I wound up doing for my first management job. I didn't get promoted into it. But yeah, it's harder, I think, than getting promoted as a contributor.
I know we only have about a minute left, but I'd love to hear a little bit more about that because I've looked into management roles, and usually they want you to have that past management experience. And even though I was a leader, I was a leader right. At an IC level, not as a people manager. And so how do you convince somebody that you would be a good manager then?
Yeah, it's so funny. You can't get experience, but you have to have experience to get I hate that crap. It's a good question. I don't know. I think like at BuzzFeed, all the managers I hired were first-time managers. Like they had never managed before. They'd been like senior ICs before. And they talked a lot about what you're talking about, which is like their previous leadership experience. Like they had like managed people without managing them, right? So they'd been on teams of people, they'd run projects, they could talk through those. I like to obviously hear from people about what they think management really is. Like, what do you think that job is? Describe it. But yeah, it's like also you have to find someone who's willing to take the shot, right? Because it's like it is kind of an unknown quantity. I've had people I hire not work out so well. I've had people do really well. Like it's kind of like people's first time doing stuff is always a little like it's a risk, no matter what. And so I think you just have to like talk through all the leadership stuff you've done. And like, also what I really like is when people talk about what they don't want to be, it's like reason I wanted to be a manager is because I had bad ones. Right. And I didn't want to do that. And so being able to talk about that was really helpful to be like, well, I don't want to be someone who's like hiding information from people. I don't want to be someone who doesn't help people or doesn't show up or doesn't, and I think it's both ends of that. But yeah, it's like, like I said, it's tough.
Yeah.
Good luck.
Do you have time for a few more questions?
Yeah, I got time.
So Sean asks, hey Sean, can you talk about span of control? I'm not actually sure what that means.
I'm not sure either.
Okay, and I noticed in the chat he had also asked.
Is the issue that there aren't career ladders?
Yeah.
That's part of it, I think. Although who's going to write the career ladder if the person at the top doesn't care? So that's part of it. I think career definition is important. But also just having someone who cares about that at all will make sure that that happens. And so it's like a chicken and egg problem. Like if you have someone who really cares, you're going to wind up with a career ladder. If you wind up with someone who doesn't care, you're never going to get it. So,
Sean, do you want to quickly?
He said span of control is the number of direct reports.
Oh.
I see. I don't think I describe it that way. I don't actually feel like I have that much control, to be honest with you, most of the time. I think number of direct reports, my personal, everyone's different, but my personal sweet spot is about 6 or 7. I think beyond that, I can start to see the experience deteriorate for people after that. I think at Etsy at some point I was managing 13 people directly, briefly, because we had a manager leave. And I was like, this is not going well. Like, it's not terrible, but it's not great. And primary is about to be very similar. Like I'm already talking to the founders about how do I when and how do we replace parts of what I'm doing, because it's just like adding on the creative team is going to wind up being too much, I think, to do a great job. So yeah, your mileage may vary, but I think entry level managers, I recommend 3 to 4. Because then you have a little variety enough to keep you busy, but also it's not so overwhelming. But then, yeah, I think as you get more skilled, like I've seen people go up to 7, 8, and it's been all right.
Cool. And then I'll take this last question from Todd. How do you tell a manager they are micromanaging far too much and it's affecting your role at the company?
You can almost say it just like that. I think I would leave out the word micromanaging. I think this is a very HR type answer, but I really liked this at BuzzFeed and I've taken it with me to primary too. But when I would do trainings on leaving feedback for people, so at BuzzFeed, I ran the technology team's review processes, and I'm doing that primary too. We would suggest this, I'm sure you know this, Jina, from working at Salesforce, but this framework called SBI, which is Situation, Behavior, Impact, which again, it sounds very HR-y, but it's very useful for almost everything when you're talking to somebody. And so telling them here's the situation, you describe what happened, you talk about the behavior that you saw or that you experienced. It's in this case, if someone's micromanaging me, I'd be I'm on this really complicated, high intensity project, feeling kind of stressed, team's feeling kind of stressed. And then yesterday, you came by my desk and we spent an hour pixel pushing around on my screen, but what I really needed to do with that time was this other thing. And so the impact is that I wasn't able to do the real work I need to do. And I feel like I don't have enough trust in the organization to do my work. And so I want to talk about that. You know what I mean? I think so if you just use that framework to kind of sketch out, that helps a couple of things. It helps helps you understand exactly what's happening, because sometimes it's just a feeling. Right. And when you really start to write it down, you're like, this happened twice in the last month. You know what I mean? You really start to think about it. You're like, maybe this isn't real. Or you're like, yep, it happens all the time. Here is a couple specific examples. It really helps you. And then it helps the other person know that it's not just a feeling. Because if you were to say this, oh, you're micromanaging me, the other person can be like, I don't feel like I'm doing that. And that doesn't help. So I think just be as direct as you can. And I also try to make sure I'm approaching it with the assumption that they don't know that's happening, that it's they don't know the impact they're having. Most people don't. Most people walk away from stuff going oh, that was fine, because they don't we don't perceive how the other person is taking it a lot of the time. So they walk away going oh, that was fun, we got to push some pixels around, and you're I'm gonna kill you. And so it's very different experiences. And so being able to at least approach them going you may not know that this is happening, but when this happens, it makes me feel this way. And I want to try to figure that out. At least gives them room to respond without feeling you know, it's directly accusatory or something like that.
Yeah, it seems like you could apply that to really any sort
Anything.
Yeah.
It's true.
Cool. And then my last question for you is, do you have anything coming up that we can look out for, as well as ways the community can support you?
I personally don't. We're going through a rebrand right now, Primary, and so we're gonna fire that off in a little bit here. And so if everyone could just be nice on design Twitter, I'd really appreciate it. But other than that, no, we're just doing our thing, trying to stay safe and sane. So if everyone can do that, that would be lovely, because I know it's hard right now.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, and thank you everyone that joined us today.
Yeah, thanks everybody. This was really fun. And thanks, Jina. I appreciate the Twitter DM and setting this up.
Awesome. All right, have a good day.
All right, you too. Bye.